What's up? It is that time again on the weekend. The college football review with you for week number 6 of the college football season. Now, of course, last week we had week number 5, which turned out to be the biggest week in all of college football. We had the biggest matchup, not only in college football, but probably football period for this season, including the NFL. Why is that? Alabama and Georgia, they got together and Alabama was able to pull out a thrilling victory against Georgia, making them the number 1 team in the country. In fact, not only were they the number 1 team in the country, they jumped from number 4 to number 1. I typically disagree when teams jump that high, especially if another team is not idle, the number 1 team. But in this case, at that time, I thought it was certainly valid. I thought Alabama played so well, even though they allowed Georgia to get back into the game. I thought that when they did beat Georgia, who was number 2 once upon a time going into the season at number 1, I figured, they showed enough to get that number 1 spot, and they did. Hello, number 1. Now we're in week number 6. Alabama. Goodbye, number 1. The biggest upset in college football probably this decade or even more than this decade, as Vanderbilt at home beats the number 1 Crimson Tide in Vanderbilt. Come on now, Nashville. They defeat Alabama, and I tell you what, they got an early lead and they just didn't give it up. Alabama was playing catch up practically the entire game, and Vanderbilt just had their number. I don't believe anyone, including gambling people in Vanderbilt, saw this coming. Alabama loses the game 40-35, and what was the difference? Diego Pavia was the difference. If you listen to the Sports Bag Bros podcast with Bias and myself on Monday and Thursday, even though we edit it and it might come out on Monday, it might come out on Tuesday, it might come out on Thursday, it might come out on Friday. But if you listen to us long enough, you would have known of the name Diego Pavia. I've been pimping that guy for about 2 years before he came to Vandy. In fact, I did not even know he was in Vandy until the first game of the season, right before they played Virginia Tech. I have Virginia Tech going to Nashville to beat Vanderbilt. But when I saw Diego Pavia was on the team, I took Vandy, and Vandy did not disappoint. They beat Virginia Tech. And at that time, I thought it was a one-off. I know Diego is an impact player, but at New Mexico State, being an impact player is pretty relative. But he is now certainly an impact player. In fact, when I did watch him play at Washington State, when I did watch him play at New Mexico State, even in the bowl game last season, I was like, this guy is fun to watch. Unfortunately, he still may not get a shot in the NFL one day. That is probably something of the past now. Diego Pavia will get his opportunity in the NFL, but before that even comes, he's going to enjoy what's going on in college football right now, specifically at Vanderbilt, specifically the beating they just gave Alabama. Yes, it's only 5 points, but if you watch the game, they methodically beat up on Alabama. No one could have seen this coming. Alabama players probably did not see this coming. Now, one thing I thought about before this even happened, I was thinking about the emotional part. Alabama was just in a highly emotional game against Georgia last week. How are they going to respond against Vanderbilt? I mean, it's easy to look past Vanderbilt when you're not coming off of a high. But is it even easier to look past Vanderbilt coming off of a high and just going through the motions, playing on fumes, and still beating them at Vanderbilt? As I say with other teams, this ain't your daddy's Vanderbilt team anymore, and they proved it. This ain't your daddy's college football anymore, and this season and previous seasons have proved that. The NIL and transfer portal has changed college football forever. Once you took that genie out of the bottle, you cannot put it back in. It's changing everything. And as I've mentioned several times, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who has mentioned it, teams can go from bad to good or good to great in one season because they've picked the proper players to put into their programs in order to have that success. Teams like Alabama or teams like Georgia, Ohio State, the big dogs, Texas, of college football, they can cherry pick a player or two, add them to the fray, and then they will be even better than what they are. Teams like Vanderbilt that need more than one player, more than 5 players, maybe more than 10 players. Colorado with Coach Prime, he proved that last year when he had over 50, 60, 70 players, brand new from the transfer portal. It didn't give him the results he needed or was expecting, but it was better than the previous season. Now you have teams like Vanderbilt who are now able to come to the forefront and show up big time. And they did just that. If you want to join the conversation, come in. It's here for you. College football, not just SEC, not just Big 10, not just Big 12 or any specific conference. It's college football across the board. If you want to talk about Division FCS, you can do that. Ivy League ball, it doesn't matter. HBCU ball, it doesn't matter. As long as it's football, bring it in here. So I'll put the link out here to invite you all for those who may want to get the invitation to come in and drop a dime in here, come in, come out, et cetera. Go ahead and do so. Right now, we do have someone up here. And it's Jermaine. What's going on, Jermaine? Turn that television down, first of all. I can't hear too much.
Hold on, no. You might hear some meowing too. You might hear some meowing too. My cat trying to get on there. Check it out.
You're watching the Yankees. It's a big college football day, but in New York, football and baseball rule. Baseball rules more than anything with the New York Yankees, 27 championships, and that's how they get down. But anyways, this is football right now, college football. I know the Yankees are playing right now, but I know you had to have heard, if not have seen, the big news in college football today. Historic news in college football today between Alabama and Vanderbilt.
Yeah, I just finished watching it back and forth between the baseball games. So, it's like Buffalo Wild Wings up in here.
You know what? We have Bias coming in right now, as I mentioned already earlier. If you watch the Sports Back Bros podcast with Bias and I, Mondays and Thursdays, the editing may switch up the days, but this Monday and Thursday for sure, you would see our opinions. You get to hear us on multiple sports, but we did speak about this as well. He's asking, roll Vandy. I think Vandy just rolled Alabama like it's spliff. Like
roll Tide, roll.
Roll Tide got rolled on 125th Street in 6th. What's going on here?
Yeah, well, I gotta say this. My buddy, matter of fact, he commented the last time I was up on there in Florida. Brian, he's a Buckeyes fan. I just shouted you out again, Brian. You, Andy, and Pam, his wonderful wife. They Buckeye fans, and I know they're gonna be number one probably after this.
Well, I think Texas will go back to being number one. But
even though they haven't played, I love Texas.
Number one. But I think Ohio State, I think they've been ignored all of this time because they hadn't played that marquee team to make you realize if they're legitimate or not. I think they are legitimate, and to their credit, they're getting these little games, if that's what you call them. They're winning them and winning them and winning them convincingly while getting the cohesion they're going to need to attack a pretty sturdy Big Ten schedule, which I don't think was great going in, but now with the addition of the Pac-12 teams, it makes the Big Ten even better. They took on Iowa today. Iowa's defense, everyone knows about it, but Ohio State ran roughshod through them. Cade McNamara, an embarrassment of a starting quarterback, still hasn't thrown a touchdown against Division I talent all season. The only touchdowns he's thrown was against FCS competition, Illinois State. So, we'll get a chance to talk about that in a minute.
Yeah.
But did you hear?
Caitlin Clark's alma mater, huh?
Yeah, right. Caitlin Clark's alma mater. She's doing a lot better off than what they're doing right now. Their defense is supposed to be sturdy, but after today with Ohio State coming through like Sherman through Atlanta, not so fast, my friend. But in any event, Bias puts up again. It said, did I see Kelsey there? No, I didn't. I did not see Kelsey there. So I don't know. Well, Kelsey where? At the Iowa game? I don't know. But he posted something else as well. Let me see.
He pops
He
up
said
everywhere, Travis Kelce.
the black shirts came up big today. I mean, yeah, Nebraska came up big. And this was the first, in my opinion, I'm not going to say legitimate because Illinois is legitimate, but this is the first real defensive team that came in. And even though the quarterbacking wasn't great with Rutgers because Calic Manis is just not a good quarterback, I talked about that on Thursday. Rutgers is for real. Greg Schiano is a legitimate coach. We've seen what he's done at Rutgers before. And Kyle Managai came into the season as a Heisman Trophy candidate, came into the season as the leading returning rusher in the Big Ten. And Nebraska defensively did what they had to do today. And they won against Rutgers. They were a 7-point favorite. Take the under because it was 14-7. But, and Dylan Raiola, he gets a lot of attention. He didn't have the game you wanted him to have today, but this is part of the learning process for a true freshman quarterback. Let's not forget, college football has changed, but being a true freshman does not change, period. Dylan Raiola, the best quarterback in the class of 2024, starting at Nebraska, his father's alma mater, has been more than impressive up to this point. Still impressive after this point because his team won. Learn from this lesson, move on to the next game. Nebraska did their thing today, got their win, and now they're legitimate. And when the voting comes out on Monday, they will be in the top 25.
This gonna be must see, or I should say must hear radio when these rankings and stuff start coming out.
Let me see. Yeah, Bias is a big Nebraska fan, if you all don't know about it, but yeah, he's a huge Nebraska fan. He said Dylan was way off today. I think, Dylan was way off today. Probably it had a lot to do with what Rutgers was doing. Rutgers, I mentioned on Thursday, they do not get after the quarterback, but today they get 4 sacks. Nebraska gets after the quarterback, and Nebraska got 4 sacks. I think not even watching the game, if you just was one of these stat people, you could see where the game was probably won for Nebraska on 4th down. When you have a quarterback like Calic Manis, who's not very good, goes not 4th down, but on 3rd down, he goes 2 for 3. I believe he went 2 for 3, 2 for 6 on 3rd downs, and then you had Nebraska. I think on 4th down, they went 3 for 3. In close games, those little nuanced details matter, and Nebraska pulled it off. Kudos, I say it, regardless of not being a Nebraska fan. When Nebraska's doing well, college football is doing well. When certain schools are doing well, college football benefits because of it. Miami playing later tonight at 10:30 over in California against Cal Berkeley. It's good when Miami is doing good, whether it's fraudulent or legit. College football is better. Once again, if you want to come in, the live show, I'll put the link in the description. You can come in and comment on your team, represent your team, do whatever you want to do in here. It doesn't have to be big time, if you call it that, college football. It could be any college football. We could talk about what happened with the Ivy League today. We could talk about anything that went down. We could talk about the big game, I guess, up north with UConn playing better than usual, playing that tough game against Temple when Temple was a double-digit underdog. And Temple came back or lost, but they kept it close. So people don't understand that tri-state thing when it comes to college football in the New York area, Jersey, Connecticut, New York, but even Philly with Temple being down in Pennsylvania, kind of sort of a little bit like the tri-state area. So yeah, there's a bit of a rivalry. Players coming from all of those cross sections in the meantime. But let me see what else is up here.
Watching Michigan and Washington on NBC right now.
What do you say?
I'm going back during the commercials. I'm switching back to the college football as well as the Yankee game. I'm watching the Michigan and Washington get ready to get started on NBC. But I think they're at halftime. I'm not even starting. I'm bugging out.
As far as the football that was played today, did you get a chance to see the Alabama game or did you hear about it? I don't think many people probably watched outside of SEC analysts because they weren't expecting much, but they missed the upset and it happened. It's going to be big news now. Bama fans are going to go crazy over this, I'm sure, and they should. But, man, I didn't expect this. No one else expected it. Alabama certainly didn't expect it. It's just something that ended up happening. And Well, now Alabama will not be number one. And in fact, before they even lost, I was wondering, were they going to drop from number one, even if they would have won? And of course, they should drop from number one. But I also thought about, would the voters think about the emotional drop from last week's game to this week's game, the distraction that comes from that, the emotion that comes from that, and just say, you know what, we'll still keep them at number one? I didn't think they would. I think if they still won, they probably would have dropped a spot or two, probably just one spot, because put Texas back where they belong. But maybe Ohio State now jumps over them, even if they would have won. So they would have probably been number three. But I'm looking at Diego Pavia, and you can't just look at stats. You have to watch the game and how he plays the game and the way he's elusive and the time he buys with his legs, and he's fairly accurate. He's just one of these winners, almost like Stetson Bennett, who's not expected to have a lot of talent. He just wins. But in this case, he has much less talent than Stetson Bennett had around him at Georgia, but he just wins. He did it at New Mexico State in a smaller area, in a smaller conference, but he was still winning. He lost some games, of course, but when they won, you knew he was the reason. When they lost, you knew he gave his best. Probably wasn't the reason. They were probably just overmatched. But he had 252 yards passing against Alabama today and ran for 57 yards. Eli Stowers, Alabama all of a sudden acted like they didn't know how to cover tight ends all of a sudden, or receivers, period. And Eli Stowers was able to get 113 yards, but he averaged over 18 yards, nearly 19 yards of reception. And it goes back to what I'm saying about the dynamic of college football now, when you're talking about teams and players mixing and matching, going one place or the other, pretty much mercenaries. Before it was in the dark, now it's in the light. But Stowers came from New Mexico State as well. He followed Diego Pavia this season. Before that, he was at Texas A&M. So this is a talented guy. It's not like Vanderbilt is getting bad talent. Well, they're not going to get the talent across the board like the major schools, but they'll have their good players here and there, even possibly great players on the scene. Ben Watson from years ago, who ended up at Georgia, was at Vanderbilt first, I believe. Or was he at Duke? But he was at one of those schools. But London Humphreys, the wide receiver at Georgia, who had 40 yards today, coming back from a bit of an injury, blazing fast player from Vanderbilt, comes to Georgia. If Kirby Smart thought he was good enough to be at Georgia, apparently this guy is a legitimate, if he were back in high school now, 4- or 5-star player, because those are the players that go to Georgia. Let me see what's going on. So,
With die hard Yankee fan, Yankees take the lead. Yes, 6-5.
Yeah, get that running tally as this football game is going on, or as the football show is going on. Miami's playing Cal tonight. Cal Berkeley out in California. They left on Thursday to take on the Golden Bears. Fernando Mendoza is the quarterback for Cal, a Florida native himself, down in Miami. Went to Mario Cristobal's alma mater, Columbus High School. So there's a tie-in in that regard. Smart guy who turned down Yale to go to Cal Berkeley. Good decision, I guess, in terms of football-wise. But this guy just proved that he can do what he wants. He has the academic background, and he happens to play some football. And he went into Auburn and beat Auburn this year with his team. They lost to Florida State, but he's still turning out to be a pretty solid quarterback for the season. And Miami, coming off of that controversial win last week against Virginia Tech in Miami, I think that should wake them up, or it should prove today if they're fraudulent or not, because there's still people out there that thinks Miami picks on the poor sisters and blind sisters of football or college football. They just get them at the right time, take advantage of them, and as soon as they get pushed back, you got issues. Well, they got pushed back last week against Virginia Tech. They had some issues, pulled it off like other teams do. In fact, I remember the Miami team from back in 2000 and the national championship they won, 2001, and national championship they won when they had that tough game against Boston College in which Ed Reed had to return an interception or a fumble that he had taken from a lineman to get the touchdown to win the game. So those things happen on the way to a championship or on the way to something meaningful. I don't think Miami is good enough
Good
to
old
win it,
Ed Reed.
but it will be meaningful. So that obviously we talked about the big game. And another thing I need to talk about with this Alabama game, one of the biggest reasons why Alabama had the problems they had. First of all, Ryan Williams is still Ryan Williams. He's still as sick as they come. He's 17 years old because he reclassified, and he played at Mobile, Alabama, football player of the year as a sophomore in Alabama, which is a legitimate football playing state. 82 yards on the day, over 27 yards per reception. Just a phenomenal player. He's already a first-round draft pick at 17 years old. I don't want to get too far ahead because anything can happen. But based on the eyeball test, seeing what he's done and seeing players who were his senior by years not play as well, man, this guy looks like he has all the good, but it wasn't enough tonight. Jalen Monroe, after looking like a Heisman Trophy candidate last week against Georgia, did not get it out there today. 310 yards and 1 touchdown, but he also threw that pick in the beginning of the game. I think one thing that is really key in this game is the time of possession battle. Vanderbilt held the ball for 41 minutes and 58 seconds. Alabama only had the ball 17 minutes and 52 seconds. In the first half, they had it for about 8 minutes. 8 minutes. If you're going to beat Alabama, and you can do it, if you have the personnel to do it, or you can keep them off balance enough, that's how you do it. You keep them off the field. You keep Jalen Monroe off the field. You keep Ryan Williams off of the field, and this is how you may have your chance to make it turn out. If you saw the game, you saw how many Alabama fans were in the stands watching this game. There were more Alabama fans in Nashville than there were Vanderbilt fans. Now, that probably will always be the case because some people think there aren't any Vanderbilt fans. In fact, you might think it's a Bigfoot sighting if you saw Vanderbilt fans.
You might see Jay Cutler in the stands.
You know what? Jay Cutler is another one of those players I'm talking about. That was a talented player who could have played other places but chose to play for Vanderbilt. So Vanderbilt has players on occasion who play there and are good enough to get to the NFL, and they do. But the huge upset, once again, incredible. Just incredible. I mean,
everybody's going to be talking about that, this
Alabama
weekend.
played for 84 yards. I mean, 84 yards. New Mexico State was 12 of 18 on third down. They got 2 sacks against Alabama, and Alabama did not sack them at all. Now, Diego Pavia is an escape artist. If you saw him play at New Mexico State, if you've seen him play so far this season, you can see he has that escapability, and his idol is Johnny Manziel, who also had that escapability. In fact, I believe he wears his number 2 in honor of Johnny Manziel. I don't know for sure, but he likes Johnny Manziel that much. So, yeah, he played like Johnny this time. And remember when Johnny upset Alabama too when he was in Tuscaloosa, the number 1 Alabama team that year. So there's just something about these people who want to be like Johnny Manziel, Johnny himself, and now Diego Pavia, and we see how it went with them. Another game as we're going through the scoreboard and things that happened in week 6 of the college football season. Georgia and Alabama got together. Well, Georgia and Auburn, well, it's in Alabama, right? Georgia and Auburn got together, the oldest rivalry in the South, if you know your college football. And Georgia did not have a letdown, but they should have had a letdown. They were the ones on the ascend when they lost the game last week in Tuscaloosa. So I can see them coming out trying to prove something, even though it's just Auburn. And they won 31-13 as Carson Beck had another pretty damn good day. 2 touchdowns, not all of these touchdowns, but he did not throw the interceptions. He did have 240 yards. It did take him a little bit of time to get it together before they started running things. Trevor 18 in particular, running things, 88 yards and 2 touchdowns. But Peyton Thorne will continue to be the thorn in Auburn's butt. The reason why, hey, he's a Michigan State quarterback. When was the last time anyone?
That was poetically put by you.
I mean, it's poetic. When was the last time Michigan State put a quarterback worth a damn into the NFL? We're talking Kirk Cousins is probably the last legitimate quarterback who had done anything, and he's doing it now. In fact, for the Falcons, he just got himself 500 yards.
Pesky Falcons.
Yeah, but Georgia takes care of business the way they should have. London Humphreys, who I mentioned earlier, who played at Vanderbilt, had a bit of an injury. I don't know which injury it was, but he did come back. He did get 40 yards. He did average 20 yards per reception, but it seems like everybody's doing that. And I go back to what I'm saying about Miami playing Cal Berkeley when Fernando Mendoza came to Auburn on the Plains as well. He threw for touchdowns, and Peyton Thorne threw 4 interceptions. So Peyton Thorne is known for being a thorn in his own team's backside. And last week, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. But that interception was taken to the house. Kip Lewis took it to the house last week. So what are we going to do? What do you want? Don't you know? So Georgia Auburn, 31-13. Georgia wins. Georgia likely moving up because Alabama's moving out. Now, Alabama, even though Vanderbilt was unranked, Alabama isn't dropping out of the top 10. They'll drop out of the top 5 and deservedly so. So obviously Georgia moving up. Everyone's kind of moving up. In fact, I think Ohio State may skip whoever's in front of them. But actually they won't. They just move up themselves because now they should be number 2 and Texas number 1. Or you can battle between those two saying that either Ohio State needs to be number 1 and Texas needs to be number 1. And let the voters decide who's going to be number 1. But you won't go wrong either way. That brings me to...
You watching Tennessee and Arkansas? I switched to that just now while the commercials are going.
Yeah, Tennessee, Arkansas. Tennessee, that's another team that has something to prove. And this Arkansas team isn't anything special, but it's an SEC game. And I can see Tennessee taking Arkansas lightly. And I can see Arkansas, at least in the early going, making it a little interesting. And it seems like that's what they've done so far. Let me see if I can go down a scoreboard. In fact, James Madison scored 70 points 2 weeks ago, scoring more points last week. Not more than 70, but they go to Louisiana Monroe right now. They can't get past 13. They're down by 1.
I'm watching Chris Mad Dog Russo go, his 5 things that drive him mad on the first take sometimes when he comes on Wednesday. Yeah. He was talking about James Madison. He was going off. I was like, don't go to sleep.
Well, I can see this Tennessee game, right now. Take the under, by the way. It's 3-0 going at halftime. Arkansas is up. Am I really surprised? I don't know, because the jury was still out on Tennessee. This is one of those teams that kind of kept moving because other teams in front of them kept losing. And it wasn't like they were beating any teams of real note. In the beginning of the season, they beat North Carolina State when I don't believe North Carolina State should have even been ranked. So you get these fraudulent rankings in the beginning of the season, and you beat these teams, and then now it goes on record as you beating a ranked team, and then by the end of the season, this team is nowhere to be found in the rankings, but yet you still beat a ranked team once upon a time. When they were ranked, in the beginning of the season is the least amount of power when it comes to ranking. Now, right about now, in October, moving forward, now it really matters. We have a real idea of what you're doing. You have a real idea as a team, and people can pick and choose who's best or have stronger arguments. Because we had a strong argument last week, and that argument got debunked today with Alabama. And I was saying it too. I was one of those suckers as well. If Alabama wins this, they're going to go to the national championship. If Georgia just continues to play like they did in the second half, those two are going to meet each other ultimately 2 more times in the SEC championship game and in the college playoffs. And something happened on the way out of Nashville, and it wasn't a win for Alabama. So I'll tell you what, there's some other games going on right now. There was one game I was interested in particular. It was a Boise State. They played today, and I'm going through the list of teams. They played
Utah State and Boise State, right? Then they beat them
in just the third quarter. But when you're talking Boise State, you're not just talking about the Smurf turf. You're more interested in what's going on with Ashton Jeanty. Yeah. Ashton Jeanty, their running back, their outstanding running back, who's a Heisman Trophy candidate, the best running back in the country. They apparently sat him down because he doesn't need to play anymore.
I was watching that. I checked out when it was 52-17. I was like, man, I'm turning this on.
Yeah, and he has 186 yards on the day, over 14 yards per carry. He's averaging over 10 yards a carry for the season so far. So expect that to go up even more after this game if he's done for the night. And based on the score, why would you have him in a game like that? I don't think you need to stat chase with him because I don't believe, first of all, the Heisman is going to a running back this year anyway. There are just too many quarterbacks out there. And so, and you know what, save him, keep him healthy, let him go to the NFL. And I think for the first time in some years, there's a special running back going into the NFL. I believe he's a special running back. Bijan Robinson, in my opinion, wasn't special. He was good. And Jahmyr Gibbs, he was good, dynamic because of his size, and he was able to catch out of the backfield. But Ashton Genty, he is special. He's a special running back. And the way his vision, the speed, all of these things. I know he's playing against weak competition, but he wasn't doing it early this season when he played against Oregon and he ran through their defense like he runs through these other defenses. So he's legit. He's a legitimate quarterback. And so, yeah, you need to give him a shout out. I wanted to check out that score anyways. And did you get a chance to watch the Rutgers and Nebraska game at all?
No, I was listening to that on the radio because I was listening to some of that on the locally here in New York. It comes on WFAN. The Rutgers, right?
Yeah.
They suffered their first loss.
Yeah, it was a road loss. It was a legitimate loss, and it was against a good team, ascending and good team. Matt Rule has Nebraska moving in the right direction. They have the number one quarterback last year's recruiting class, Dylan Raiola, quarterbacking now as a true freshman, effective all season long. Even right now, he did not have his best day, completed less than 50% of his passes, but he got the win, and it benefited the team. So now you could expect them to be in the top 25 this Monday when the votes come out. And it's good. And I tell you what, you look at what Rutgers has at quarterback, and it's surprising that if they had any real production at the quarterback spot, they win the game. But absolutely horrid production by Ethan Kaliakmanis, who came from Minnesota. And I remember when talking about this game on Thursday on the Sports Backbones podcast with Bias, I remember talking about him having that experience of having played Nebraska last year and winning in Minnesota. But what difference does it make now? And he is playing for a better team now than he was. But he hasn't gotten any better. Everyone around him is better. He had a Heisman Trophy candidate running back running the ball in Kyle Managai. But, and you know what? To the credit of Nebraska, they was able to keep Managai in check. And it had a lot to do because they could load the box when the quarterback is that bad. And that's what they did. They were able to load the box, stop Kyle Managai because Ethan Kaliakmanis is not a good quarterback. And that's what you do. And so Managai couldn't be as effective because he's an awesome running back as well. Not like Genty from Boise State, but he's certainly good. People who want to come in, you can come in, go into the link, click it. You can come in, leave a comment, or you can just come in live. Just come in live if you want, man. We can keep it like
I'm going to land my plane here, Trav, because the bottom of the eighth, Yankees get ready.
All right. Trust me. Man. I'm going to go solo flight like JFK Jr. should have done.
Peace.
All right, man. Get him out of here. Peace later, man. But anyways, getting back to the business at hand, when it comes down to the college football, I'm going to go solo, but I can do that. We already talked about the huge upset, the biggest upset of the decade. There's no doubt about that, with Alabama going down to Vanderbilt in Nashville, 40-35, after last week beating the number 2 team in the country so convincingly. Even though there was a comeback, they were thrown to the number 1 team spot, and they deserved it. One of the few times I agree with the number 4 jumping to number 1 because of their impressive win, even if number 1 is having a game. And normally that happens when number 1 is on a bye and you play a good game and you leapfrog them. But Texas did play last week. But Alabama was that impressive, and they did leapfrog Texas. But now Texas deserves to be at number 1 again. Ohio State has been disrespected all year. They need to be at number 2. And you know what? There's still an argument with the way they've been winning their games, and as decisive as they've been, they can have an argument to be number 1 as well. taking on that dominant defense of Iowa today and running through it like it wasn't even there. Now, Cade McNamara had everything to do with Iowa looking so bad offensively, but they looked bad offensively all year. Cade McNown, I call him Cade McNown from UCLA years ago, but Cade McNamara hasn't thrown a touchdown against Division I-A football this season. His only 3 touchdowns came against Illinois State, an FCS school. And he has not thrown any more touchdowns, but he has thrown interceptions, and those interceptions directly reflect in the games that they've lost. So now they've lost to Ohio State in grand fashion, by the way, because Ohio State put the beats on them. And so that was that. I talked about Georgia and Auburn, the oldest rivalry in the South. Georgia wasn't as emotional, I guess, going into this game as they were last week. You know, you could blame the emotion and drain on Alabama having their problems against Nashville and Vanderbilt, and you can do the same for Georgia. But Georgia kept it 100, playing in a big rivalry game, I guess, because it is the oldest rivalry in the South, 31-13, as Carson Beck, steady, still wins the game. So now Georgia's really, really back into the fray. I don't know what to think of Alabama, but luckily this is a 12-team playoff coming up. So Alabama isn't completely out. They're not out at all. You know, if this is something that can get their attention, it certainly has. I just talked about Rutgers and Nebraska getting together, an underrated game, Big Ten teams, and 14-7, very tough defensive game. Freshman quarterback Dylan Raiola didn't play very good, completed fewer than 50% of his passes, but guess what? He was on the winning side. Defense had to take over in this game. Nebraska had 4 sacks. Rutgers had 4 sacks. Also, because of Ethan Kaliakmanis, the quarterback for Rutgers who used to play at Minnesota, because of him and not being a threat, they were able to key in on Kyle Managai, the running back for Rutgers, and that had everything to do with how this game ended up. So moving on from those games, let's give some props where props to do, first of all. Air Force and Navy, or should I say Navy and Air Force. Navy is playing exceptional this year. Navy has a passing game. And I'm not talking about a 250 or 300-yard passing game. They just need about 150 to 200-yard passing game because they are always effective running the ball. Even when they don't have good teams, they still run the ball. Now they have a good quarterback in Blake Harvey, and he looks legit. I've watched him a few times, and he throws the ball fairly well, especially for an option quarterback, and he runs the hell out of the ball, and he does it very well. Typically, you get these Air Force Academy and you get Navy together, you throw Army in there for that Commander-in-Chief trophy, and it's always a tight game, regardless of who's good and who's not, but not this time. And Navy, 5-0. Going into this game, Army and Navy were 4-0 at the same time for the first time since 1945. That's World War II we're talking about, don't you know? That's kind of serious. I mean, they're doing something different. And now they beat Air Force. Not only did they beat them well, 34-7. 329 yards on the ground against them, and then they threw 134 yards out there. And it's not even up there with what they would typically do. Blake Horvath he's a Heisman Trophy candidate, first of all. You got to say that. And as an option quarterback, in my opinion, I think he's every bit as good as any option quarterback I've seen, not only in military academies, because he does have that dimension of throwing the ball well. We could talk about Tommy Frazier. Tommy Frazier was excellent. He was an underrated passer. Eric Couch from Nebraska, underrated passer, but more of an athlete than a passer. You know, he could be a running back. But going back, if you want to stick with the military, Bo Morgan for Air Force, or my favorite, D. Dallas, the legendary wizard of option quarterbacking. I mean, not Jamel Holloway or Charles Thompson from Oklahoma from back in the day, but certainly up there with the best of all time. And my personal favorite, the late D. Dallas. Alton Grizzard, who played for Navy as well. He was more tough than very good and fast. You know, with Navy SEAL, ultimately, another late person because he passed away as well. But anyways, I was getting ahead of myself. But give Navy props for what they had done. I mean, they got the 2 sacks out there today. Defense was playing well. I watched the game because I respect them so much. I just watched the games. Blake ends up getting 115 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns. And then Eli, what do you call him? Heidenreich, he broke he had 100 yards on the day even, but most importantly, he averaged over 16 yards a carry. Look at these numbers here. 16 yards a carry. He didn't even get in the end zone. So you're talking Blake having 225 yards passing on the day. And I remember he had those rushing yards against, not 225 yards of passing. He had 225 yards, I remember, back against UAB. And I know he ran really well against Memphis. He had 211 yards there. But now, nevertheless, Navy is 5-0. So props to the midshipmen. I know I'm not going to say I don't know anything. Navy and Army getting together this year is going to be one of those games for the ages. I know almost every game they play, even if they were both 1-9 or 1-10, would be a game for the ages. But now something's brewing between both teams. And this will certainly be a game for the ages when they finally get together at the end of the season in their annual get-together, one of the best rivalries, if not the best of all time. I think it is. Now, I'm saying that from a nostalgic standpoint, a patriotic standpoint. There are several other big-time rivalries out there. I love certain rivalries, more than others. Harvard-Yale, I love that rivalry. You know what I mean? It's not one of the bigger rivalries. Cal-Stanford, I mean, that's not my kind of rivalry, but Alabama and Auburn, huge rivalry. Ohio State, Michigan, I like that rivalry, but I'm biased towards the Alabama-Auburn rivalry. I go all over the place. But either way, I had to give props what props are due with Navy playing the way they are. Blake Harrith being a Heisman Trophy candidate and a legitimate Heisman Trophy candidate, the key to everything Navy does this season. 5-0 for the midshipmen moving forward. And then you can't talk about the midshipmen stay in the military and not talk about Army taking care of Tulsa today. 49-7. I mean, they're just blowout after blowout, and you can't stop the running game. You know it's coming. It's the triple option like they all do. It's just that it's magical with some teams and not others. This year, Navy and Army have the magic going on. 321 yards on the ground for Army. Bryson Daly just averaged over 6 yards a carry. And on top of that, almost 60 yards passing. 60% yards passing. 60% passing. I think it was 58%. But still, I mean, running back, the whole thing's based on the running and playing tough defense. I know Kanye Udo, he had 137 yards on the day, but look at this. Dude was averaging 22 yards a carry, nearly 23 yards a carry he was averaging today. So, yeah, that's serious. Let's see what's going on here. Oh, okay, we got Frank Green in here. He said the lack of development of high school level is starting to show itself in college football. I don't know. Let's read the rest. There will be more upsets to these powerhouse teams like Alabama. Talent alone will take you, but so far, keep watching. You know what? There's a point to be made there, and I certainly agree with your point to that degree. But also, I'm wondering, how much does the transfer portal, if you want to mention something like that, the transfer portal has a lot to do with this, because now you're allowing teams who were just regular teams to become the teams they are now, at least in line for upsets like we had tonight with Alabama. Diego Pavia, he goes kind of through, he went to junior college and the whole deal, goes to New Mexico State, always wanted to go to the SEC according to the storyline tonight. He ends up in the SEC only because he played at New Mexico State, and now the transfer portal is a thing, ends up at Vanderbilt, and is the reason why Vanderbilt is doing anything of substance this year. He's not the only player. You can look at a litany of players who've gone throughout the entire country. Like you're shopping and purging from other people's rosters, other teams' rosters to better yourself. It's like a second opportunity at recruiting. And that's what it seems like. And that's what's going on right now. Okay, maybe you develop better when you're 18, 19 to 20 because you came out when you were 17. Well, you're a 3-star guy coming out. You're on a lower tier program. You actually have this boom when you get to school through their weight program, speed program, just natural progression of getting older and maturation. And then you play better. And then now someone catches you catch their eye, and now they're taking you from that team. So you get a second recruitment. It happened in basketball. I talked about this a couple of years ago. I had a basketball show, and I mentioned that about the transfer portal. And I mentioned a player in particular, Braylon Norris, who played for Oakland University out west. And coming out of high school in Ohio, he was a sharpshooter, 5'10", so he wasn't one of those players that everyone was looking at. Probably too short and probably wasn't fast of foot, wasn't as athletic as they might have wanted him to be. But what did he do? He went to Oakland, and he showed that he could play on that 1A level. And once he showed that, he ends up going to Loyola Chicago, second recruitment. And I think a lot of college players are doing the same thing this year or this time around because the rules allow them to do it. The second recruitment, the recruitment you didn't get earlier, now when you finally develop under another coach or another team, now you're all bets are off. They can recruit you. Now you see it's not abnormal to see these players with 3 different teams. Look at DJ that played in Clemson, Oregon State, now at Florida State. And if he had another shot, he'd do another school. You look at Cam Ward from Miami, Incarnate Word, then Washington State. Now he's with Miami. 3 schools. And this seems to be, I'm not going to say a pattern, just this happens to be a happenstance. A lot of the players are playing for multiple schools. If not 2, they have 3. You look at some of these other players, for instance, look at last season. Cody Schrader. He led the SEC in rushing after coming from Truman State, being the player of the year, getting over 2,100 yards there in Missouri. So then he ends up going to the big boy school, Missouri, becomes the leading rusher in the SEC after coming in as a 5th string running back. He ends up not getting drafted, but he's now with the Rams, I believe. He signed with San Francisco coming out. Now he's with the Rams, I believe, and they hadn't activated him yet. I still believe he's going to be a serviceable player when he does get his opportunity. But this is the nature of the way we're living now. I don't think it's necessarily just the high schools that aren't developing these players. Because look at the power high schools we have, Mater Dei. Look at the type of talent on those teams. Look at John Bosco out there in California, Bellflower. This is where DJ Uigalele is from, and the talent they have. Look at St. Thomas Aquinas here in the state of Florida. Look at the talent they have. So these players are getting developed. I know it's not an indication of the entire country, but when you look at these top schools in high school, this is typically where a lot of that top talent is coming from. And so I mentioned Mater Dei, John Bosco Prep, St. Thomas Aquinas, or just almost a lot of those huge teams in Texas, all over, Georgia as well. So yeah, those players are developed well. I think the transfer portal is a bigger issue than anything else. And that's the way. I don't think it's a development thing on the high school level. I think it still may be a development thing once they get to college, once they do develop, because that's why they're leaving and other teams are taking them, because they are now developed. They're the finished product or close enough to it to get snatched out. The better teams don't shop as much. The teams that need players badly, they do all the shopping. You look at the Georgia States when they had about 22 people come out and 20 people went in or whatever it was. But then you have the Deion Sanders deal from last year, about 80 some odd people. Now this year, about 50 and change. Still a lot, but he's doing better. So, yeah, but good question or good statement. In fact, letting me know what's going on. But I think that it's probably on the line of the colleges or the transfer portal is more of an issue than the high school development. I go to high school games all the time. I've covered high school games, high school students, high school players for decades. I've been so many different places, and I watch how these coaches interact with these players. Now, I don't know if it's still the same everywhere because I don't do it as much, but I'm still thinking it's one of those things too, when they finally get to college, that's when it really happens like that. And so next game up, Texas A&M and Missouri. I was just talking about Texas A&M. I was just talking about Missouri, in fact, talking about Cody Schrader and how he led the league or led the SEC in rushing last season. Still wasn't drafted, which is insane. But either way, I wasn't expecting this at all. A&M, even at home, 41-10. I think that's the biggest margin of victory A&M has ever had against a top 10, top 15 team or whatever, top 25, because I don't think it's happened before. But Connor Weekman, give him credit, 276 yards. He didn't need to throw touchdowns. He just needed to manage the game because Le'Veon Moss had 138 yards and 3 touchdowns on the game. And he broke a 75-yarder and had over 11 yards to carry. So your quarterback, it's nice for him to get touchdowns. You would like for him to get touchdowns. But if your running game is that effective and you have that kind of a player, well, let it play out. Brady Cook didn't play. He had a miserable game, 13 for 31. Just terrible, 186 yards and a touchdown. Directly the reason why they did not win the game. But Texas A&M, I mean, I don't know what to think about them. They have one loss this season. Surprise, surprise. You think about how far they removed from the Jimbo Fisher experiment and the $72 million plus that Jimbo was given just to stay away from our campus as he continues to say things about other players from the sidelines. But Texas A&M seems like they're finding their mojo, but with the SEC being as strong as it is, exactly what are they going to do? And so Ohio State, Big Ten, should be the number 2 team in the country to me going into Tuesday or going into Monday. They crushed Iowa 35-7, absolutely steamrolled them. This imposing physical defense of Iowa, we saw them from last year. A lot of them returned this year, and you was expecting a lot of the same, and you got it in the early games that were inconsequential. Now you have them against Ohio State, and they give up 412 yards and 4 sacks. I mean, and Will Howard hasn't had to do much of anything. Will Howard hasn't really done much of anything this year in terms of extraordinary numbers that you would expect from Ohio State and the receivers that are at Ohio State. But he throws for 209 yards, gets 4 touchdowns. That's good. It's great if you can get it. But things got to get better in terms of talent. And when the season first started, I was thinking about, okay, Ohio State should be so much further ahead than Michigan because Michigan lost so many players. Not only did they lose so many players, they also lost their head coach and lost their starting quarterback. The list goes on. But on defense, they brought back some good players on the defensive line. Will Johnson, in particular, in the defensive backfield, even though he's been injured somewhat this season, he's there. He's a talented player when he's healthy. But I thought that Michigan wouldn't be a problem for Ohio State. But after watching Michigan, and even after the loss they did have, I think, against Texas, and I think that they are, because of the rivalry, it's going to be a tougher game than I was expecting from Ohio State, because before the season started, I was virtually guaranteeing Ohio State was going to finally break the spell, break the schneid of losing to Michigan, because I thought Michigan didn't have anything left. I still believe Ohio State wins the game, because if Michigan is going into that game again with Alex Orji as their quarterback, forget about it. Just forget about it. Or anyone else without experience, just forget about it. And so, Ohio State, we already know about Jeremiah Smith, the wide receiver coming out of high school. Chaminade Madonna here in Florida. He had a JoJo Trader. His teammate is a wide receiver for the Miami Hurricanes. Definitely not getting the props as Jeremiah is getting up there at Ohio State. But JoJo does have talent, and he has a lot of people in front of him who are just as talented through the transfer portal. And then someone like Xavier Restrepo, you're not going to beat him out. Xavier Restrepo is the legit deal for the Miami Hurricanes. And going back to Ohio State once again against Iowa, Iowa prides itself on stopping the run, but Iowa gives up 203 yards rushing. I mean, Quinshawn Judkins had 78 yards and didn't need a touchdown, and they still won by the margin in which they won. And so that brings me to the Penn State game. I didn't even want to really mention anything about Penn State because, man, if you're talking about a quiet team, and they're going to be one of those teams that moves up as well because they won. They didn't lose. And because Alabama did lose, everyone's kind of moving up. And Penn State's going to be one of those teams as they played against UCLA at home, Happy Valley, 27-11 victors against the Bruins. But Drew Allard had 237 yards, 1 touchdown. Sometimes I'm into the stats because the stats kind of tell the story. Sometimes I'm not really into the stats because you watch the games and it also tells you the story. I don't know, man. I'm just not completely sold on him as an elite quarterback. I look at the numbers. Of course, the numbers say one thing, but I watched the game, and I don't know how far back you go with Penn State football, but if you remember Tony Saka years ago, Tony Saka vibes hit me with Drew Allard. I don't know why. And we saw how Tony Saka didn't turn out to be an NFL quarterback, but he was good and solid at Penn State. But if Drew Allard is good and solid at Penn State, they're making him out to be Superman at Penn State. And I don't believe he's a Superman. I think he's a good quarterback. No, Eli Holstein is a better quarterback playing at Pitt. In fact, he got a win today too. He almost hit 400 yards today too. And I remember in the beginning of the season, he had 3 straight games with over 300 yards and was the only quarterback to do that in college football. Another Alabama player letting you know about this transfer portal, purging from other people's rosters. All these players just leaving on their own because they can't play where they're playing. But Eli Holstein is one of those players who left from Alabama, is in Pitt, certainly will become an NFL draft pick, a first-round draft pick at that. This draft coming up in 2025 has a litany of quarterbacks with potential first-round ability. And I think after the last draft of April 2024, and the quarterbacks that went, and some of them I think went when they probably shouldn't have, but I guess the CJ Stroud effect from the previous year of getting that number 2 and seeing how well he played out, I think people jump on it. They want to get that guy. They think that they're the person who's going to get that guy and be the reason as a coach for why that person played the way that they probably will play. That's what I'm thinking. Now, it may not be true, but that's what I'm thinking on the surface. So let me see. Ole Miss, South Carolina. You know what? I won't even really get into the details of this game. The reason why is because I did take Ole Miss to lose at South Carolina because I thought South Carolina's defense was doing something special. I even mentioned Beamer Ball is back, but Beamer Ball isn't back. Beamer Ball got beaten down in South Carolina 27-3. Jackson Dart, still a pretty good quarterback. I thought last week against Kentucky proved that he wasn't a good quarterback. I never really thought he was an excellent quarterback, but Lane Kiffin can make you look like an excellent quarterback. Lane Kiffin, Steve Sarkisian can make you look like a legitimate quarterback. But either way, South Carolina, and I went to a South Carolina game last year. They played the Florida Gators in Columbia, and it's like watching that game and having a disappointment, feeling disappointed. I'm not even a South Carolina fan. Being disappointed because they lose in front of that rabid fan base. That stadium is so rocking and so dedicated to the cause when it comes to their Gamecocks. It's almost a shame. You should feel guilty for not winning in front of that fan base. That's how it seems. And the reason why I even ended up in Columbia to watch that game is because I went to the Gator Bowl the year before and watched them play against Notre Dame. And they lost that game after Notre Dame was able to come from behind as Tyler Buckner, who played for Notre Dame at the time, transferred to Alabama, was in Alabama last year, transferred again. He's on playing lacrosse now, whatever. Not from Alabama either. But anyway, I went to that Gator Bowl, and I was sitting in a section with so many Gamecock fans. Notre Dame fans were there, but because of the proximity, South Carolina, not too far from Jacksonville, the Gator Bowl, Tax Slayer Bowl, whatever you're calling it these days, those fans were the coolest fans of all time. And I remember telling them, bro, if it's like this at your games, but I got to go. And they was like, come on, we'll be glad to have you. And I had to go. And I went. And it just happened to be the Gator game. And I had a chance to check it out. And it was cool. And I loved the atmosphere. And it was my mom's hometown. She's no longer with us, but I had to go. She's from Columbia. I had to go check out those Gamecocks. And it was an excellent game. Bad result as the Gators came from behind, beat the Gamecocks, and the rest was history. They lost, moved on. But I thought with the way the Gamecocks played this season, the way they blew out Kentucky earlier in the season in Kentucky, I thought something special was going on. And then they gave LSU a bit of a tough try. I thought something was going on. And so I carried it over saying, yep, this is going to be it. Not really paying too much attention to their quarterbacking situation. Sellers is not a good quarterback. I don't know if he'll ever be a good quarterback. But they lost nonetheless, and that's the way it ended for them. So there you have it for now. There are games going on right now as we speak. I don't have them in front of me. Arkansas is playing Tennessee. At halftime, I saw Arkansas was ahead 3-0. So take the under if you ever thought about it, or you should have taken the under. Miami is taking on the California Golden Bears tonight in California. They left on Thursday to get acclimated to that 3-hour time difference it takes between the Pacific time zone and the Eastern time zone down in Coral Gables. Hopefully Manny knows what he's doing. Manny Cristobal knows what he's doing. Manny, I'm thinking about Manny Diaz. Come on, what's going on? He was a Cane too, right? Mario Cristobal going back to the West Coast. You know, he was the Oregon guy up there for a stint. Now he's back over there in Pac-12 land, which is now ACC land. The geography's all over the place. Come on. What you going to do? But Miami's a 10.5-point favorite against them. And after what happened last week, was that a wake-up call for Miami to take this serious? I believe they took Virginia Tech serious. In fact, as a Canes fan, you know, I like what the Canes were doing, but I wasn't completely on board with this blowing teams out and we're that good. We're blowing teams out because they weren't very good. And that includes the Gators. And in regards of where you're playing them, they still aren't very good, especially this year. And maybe even more of a reason why their coach, Billy Napier, is not going to finish the season. And if he does finish the season, this is his last year with the Gators. So, yeah, Miami's playing tonight. I mentioned Arkansas and Tennessee. I also mentioned Boise State playing Utah State. That was a 26.5-point line. And if you listen to the show on Thursday when I give out my 4 picks for gambling against the line or whether or not I want to take an over-under or whatever it is, you would have heard that was my tribute to John Amos, now the late John Amos / James Evans, my belt beat down pick of the week. And this was it. I figured that Boise State would blow them out by more than 26 points and everyone would get their money if they took the favorite. I rarely take favorites that high, but for this occasion, with Ashton Jeanty playing the way he's playing, the way Boise State plays at home, and the running yards Utah State gives up, it all works out to just spank them and move on. Even if you put your backups in there, they should still be able to hold the fort. The last time I checked, they were up by 32, 52-20. Let's see if anything changed. But that's it for me right now. If you stayed this long, thanks for joining. If you didn't stay up this long, check out the video when it becomes live or just check it out on the recording. I will be back again next week for week number 7 of the college football week or season. And we don't know what to expect like we didn't know today. So I'm Trav. And by the way, if you want to check out our podcast on Mondays and Thursdays, it may come out on Tuesdays or even Fridays because I do the editing, sometimes the same day, sometimes the day after. Go ahead and do so. Sports Bag Bros, that's what it is. The Sports Bag Bros podcast with Bias and myself. So if you want to check it out, go ahead and do that. We talk about a litany of sports, but we do speak on college football as well. I'm Trav, and it was a pleasure, I guess, for the people who stayed around. See you.